A very good evening to students, parents, RUMC colleagues, partners, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first session of the RUMC GoBeyond Keynote Speaker Series, a distinguished series by RCSI University Malaysia campus in commemoration of our 25th Silver Jubilee anniversary. First and foremost, thank you for taking some time off your schedules to joining us today. My name is Raji, Head of Corporate Marketing at RCSI University Malaysia campus, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's session. Now, before we get started, I'd like to run through a few items so you would know how to participate in today's keynote session. You will be on listen-only mode and muted throughout the session. Please feel free to submit your questions to our speaker today on the question pane in your attendee interface. You may send in your questions at any time during the event, and we will be addressing the questions during the Q&A session after the presentation. The year was 1996, when what was then known as Penang Medical College was established in Penang, and we are the first private accredited medical school in Malaysia, graduating the first batch of doctors in the year 2001. We have had many significant milestones. We graduated our 2000 graduate this year at the 21st conferring ceremony. RUMC also received the foreign branch campus status in 2018, and our name was recently changed as well to RCSI and UCD Malaysia campus. Owned by two leading universities in Ireland, namely the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland and University College Dublin, providing high-quality medical education has always been a top priority for the university. We are celebrating our 25th Silver Jubilee anniversary this year, and to mark this significant milestone, we are proud to present the Go Beyond Keynote Speaker Series with a lineup of insightful keynote sessions highlighting pressing health issues in Malaysia and beyond. The series, scheduled every month until December 2021, will feature healthcare experts as they share invaluable knowledge and insight into specific health issues in their area of expertise. Our first speaker for today is none other than RUMC's President and CEO, Professor David Whitford, who is also an international diabetes expert. He graduated in medicine from Cambridge University and Newcastle University in the UK. Professor Whitford trained as a family physician and practiced for 16 years in Newcastle upon Tyne. During this time, he was awarded the highest quality award in UK General Practice, Fellowship of the Royal College of General Practitioners. Prof. Whitford was also awarded a doctorate from Cambridge University in 2003 for his research on diabetes. He then moved into academic general practice in the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, RCSI, and has published over 60 research papers in international journals. Professor Whitford took up a post in RCSI Bahrain as Professor of General Practice and was later appointed Head of School of Postgraduate Studies and Research. He then moved to RCSI and UCD Malaysia campus as Vice President for Academic Affairs and Registrar in 2017 before taking office as President and CEO in 2019. He is responsible for setting up the MINT-FM training scheme for family medicine in Malaysia. In today's session, Prof. Whitford will be sharing with us on the various risks associated with diabetes and what you can do about it. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Prof. Whitford to address the audience for today's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raji, and I'm delighted to be here at this 25th Silver Jubilee celebrations with these series of talks. So I'm going to be talking on this topic area of preventing diabetes, which is one that I've had an interest in for a very long time, from being a clinician right the way through. So I'm just bringing up my slides here, and then we'll get on with the actual talk. So this is an important area, and what I want to do is to let you know a bit about the risk of diabetes in the world today, and particularly in Malaysia, and what you might be able to do about it. So I'm going to take you through a few different areas. So I'm going to speak about, first of all, just a bit of background on what is diabetes, for those of you who may not be entirely clear about what diabetes is. then why should you even care about diabetes? What's the problem with it? What issues does it have in terms of our health and well-being? Then looking a bit at what is risk, because we're talking about risk of diabetes, and it's a difficult concept to understand is risk. And then looking at who is at risk of getting diabetes and why. And then, also then looking at how do you find out your risk of diabetes? Because it's all well and good thinking, well, there's a lot of people with diabetes, but am I likely to get it? And then probably the most important part of the talk is, you know, can we do anything about it? Can we prevent diabetes? And if so, how do we actually go about that, about preventing diabetes? So without further ado, I'm going to kick off and look at what is diabetes. Well, diabetes is basically a condition that affects how your body uses food as energy. When you have your meal, when you eat any food, what happens is your body breaks that food down, mostly into sugar that gets absorbed into your bloodstream, and that sugar then gets used by your body as energy. And the actual part of your body that burns that sugar is your cells, within your cells. So insulin, which most of you will have heard of in relation to diabetes, is produced by the pancreas, and it acts like a key. It basically attaches itself to the outside of the cell and allows the transfer of the sugar from your blood into the inside of the cell, and within the cell the sugar is then burnt off as energy and enables you to go about your daily living and have the energy that you have to do everything that you have to do each day. So that's essentially a bit of a description of what is actually happening inside your body when you eat a meal, and the insulin works to actually enable the sugar to be taken up into your cells to be burnt as energy. So if you have diabetes, there's two things that might be happening to stop that working so effectively. The first is that your body might not be making enough insulin. And there's several types of diabetes, but type 1, which tends to affect children and younger people, is where your body either in a lot of people just stops making insulin entirely. And so you have to replace that by injections of insulin. But type 2 diabetes, which is the commonest form of insulin in the world, about 90 to 95% of people with diabetes have type 2 diabetes. There's two components to it. One is that the body may not be making enough insulin, and the other is that the insulin isn't working as well as it should. So when it tries to act as the key to let sugar into the cell, it doesn't attach to the cell properly and doesn't transfer the sugar inside the cell. And so therefore you don't have the sugar inside the cell to actually burn as energy. So what then happens is that all the sugar that should have gone into your cell actually stays around in your bloodstream and circulates in your blood. So you have a high blood sugar. And that's where the high blood sugar comes from in terms of diabetes. So the big question then is, well, what difference does that make? Why should you even care? Well, the biggest issue is that having too much sugar in your blood actually damages the lining of the blood vessels in your body and causes those blood vessels then to have damage. And because the sugar is circulating everywhere in your body, not just in some organs, but going everywhere around in your blood, it actually damages everywhere in your body. So over time, this causes serious health problems like heart disease, particularly heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease, including kidney failure, damage to the eyes, including blindness, and damage to the nerves, which in some people can lead to them needing limbs amputated due to things like gangrene and the like. So everywhere in your body can be affected by diabetes. It's why it's quite an interesting condition, because it affects every part of your body. So you should care about diabetes because it's going to cause serious health problems. But the most serious health problems you can come across in life is death. And about the majority of people who develop diabetes actually die of heart disease, of heart attacks. Well over 50%, about 60%, sometimes higher than that. Diabetes is the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. But what people don't always realize is how much life is lost through diabetes. So people with diabetes on average, live 12 years less than would be expected if they didn't have diabetes. Now, it's important you look at that word average, because some people with diabetes might not live a day less than they expected, and other people might lose 20 or 30 years of their life and die very early as a result of their diabetes. So the average is that on average, people with diabetes lose about 12 years of life. So they live 12 years less than they would have done if they didn't have diabetes. Quite a major thing. And one of the comparators with that is if you look at people with cancers, for example, breast cancer, women with breast cancer lose about 8 years of life on average. So far less than people lose with diabetes. And very few people rate diabetes as seriously as cancer. But it is just as serious and more serious than many cancers. There are, of course, cancers that are more serious than diabetes in terms of life loss, but I'm talking about the majority of cancers. People actually lose more life through getting diabetes than they do through getting cancer. So that sort of explains why diabetes is so important. It's a very, very serious condition and can seriously affect the number of years that you will live and knock years off your life as a result of that. So the question is, well, what is risk? What are we at risk? What are our risks of diabetes? So risk, as a definition, is the possibility of something bad happening. And I just want to make plain again about the word possibility. It isn't a certainty that something bad is going to happen if you're at high risk. So people at high risk of diabetes may never get diabetes. People at low risk of diabetes may end up getting diabetes. What the risk is doing is pushing you into different categories of the population to show whether you're more or less at risk of something bad happening. Is the possibility high in your case, or is it low? But it doesn't mean that it's a certainty. So the risk of diabetes in the world at the moment is that about 1 in 10 of the adult population in the world has diabetes. So that's the adult population being people aged over 18. In Malaysia, it's far worse. It's about 1 in 20. It's about 1 in 5. So 20% of the adult population in Malaysia has diabetes, and there's reasons behind that, and I'll go into those in a minute. But the risk is also the chance of getting diabetes, the possibility is increasing, largely due to changes in our lifestyle. We've become a lot more sedentary, had worse diets over the last 50, 60 years, or a bit more than that. And so the number of people with diabetes in the world is increasing dramatically. So your risk of diabetes is increasing whether you like it or not, because everybody else's is. But it's all well and good sort of saying 1 in 5 people are going to get it. The real question is, well, what's your risk of diabetes? So when you look at your individual risk of diabetes, the factors that account for that risk fall into 2 major categories. There's factors that you can't do anything about because you're born with them, or they develop as time goes on. And then there are factors that you can change, which are related to life size. So the factors, this is a fairly comprehensive list of the major factors causing diabetes. It's not 100% comprehensive, but it is the major factors. So the factors that you can't do anything about are these. First of all, your race or ethnicity. You can't change that, you've been born with it. And unfortunately for yourselves, if you're Malaysian, being Asian, being Afro-Caribbean, being Arab ethnicity, or some Pacific Islanders and other Aboriginal groups have a much higher risk, it's in your genes, of actually developing diabetes. So there's nothing you can do about that. Similarly, family history. You can't change your parents. So family history is largely related to first-degree relatives, which are parents and brothers and sisters, the people immediately related to you. So if you have a parent or a brother or sister with diabetes, you are at higher risk of developing diabetes yourself. Your gender determines diabetes to an extent. If you're male, you're more likely to develop diabetes. And your age. And age, of course, as your age increases, you're more likely to develop diabetes. And particularly after the age of about 40 years, your risk of diabetes starts climbing and carries on climbing into the 80s and even into the 90s. So whatever age you get to, your risk of diabetes is continuing to grow. So why is it important to know even about these things that you can't do anything about? Well, it's very important to know, because if you have these factors, the things you can do something about are even more important. So, you know, I myself, you know, I'm Caucasian race, and I don't have a family history. I'm getting older and I'm male, so I have 2 of those. I don't have all 4. If you have all 4, the list I'm about to show you becomes even more important that you actually do something to actually reduce your risk. So these are the things that you can change. Being overweight increases your risk of diabetes. So overweight in an Asian population is largely defined as a body mass index of greater than 23. And I'll talk about body mass index a bit more in a few minutes. But it's not just being overweight that increases your risk of diabetes, it's the type of food that you actually eat. So you can be eating a poor quality of food, and that increases your risk of diabetes. And I'll go into that a bit more later. So having a poor diet increases your risk of diabetes. Being inactive, and a lot of us are a lot more inactive than used to be the case. So having sedentary jobs, not getting exercise, etc., leads to a higher risk of diabetes. If your doctor's told you you have high blood pressure, or if you're on treatment for high blood pressure, you have an increased risk of diabetes. If you're a smoker, you have an increased risk. And then these 2 conditions I put at the end, gestational diabetes and pre-diabetes. So if gestational diabetes is developing diabetes during pregnancy, if you've had that happen, you're at increased risk of getting diabetes later in life. And if you have been told that you have pre-diabetes, which is a raised blood sugar but not high enough to say that you have diabetes, again, you're at increased risk of diabetes. So these are a lot of the things that contribute towards your risk of diabetes. And some of them can be changed and some cannot. But most importantly, I suppose, is what your individual risk is. And so how can you actually determine your risk of diabetes? Well, there's many risk calculators, diabetes risk calculators online. In fact, it's a bit confusing if you go online, because there are quite a few. Some are better than others. They largely ask you to input your data, very simple questions usually, and they largely come up and calculate your risk of diabetes, usually as low, moderate, or high. And for yourselves, or most of you, I would recommend this one because it is specifically targeted at the Asian population. It's if you Google diabetes risk calculator Asian, it will come up probably right near the top. And the reason that I recommend it is it's been developed by 2 very reputable organizations or universities, the National University of Singapore in collaboration with Harvard School of Public Health. So both of them have a very good standing. The risk scoring has been tested well, and it's likely to give you a fairly accurate measure. So when you go onto the site, the first thing you'll see under the risk calculator is this page, diabetes risk test, and you would go on to start your test. And it takes you through page by page asking different questions. So I'm going to take you through the questions, not one by one, but show you them related to one person. And there's 13 questions this asks, and they're all very straightforward questions, none of them terribly intrusive. So we'll deal with this gentleman here who wants to know what his risk of diabetes is. So the first question that he gets asked is how old he is. So he's 58 years old. He's male. The second question. Does he have blood pressure or is on treatment for blood pressure? Yes, he's on treatment for blood pressure. Does he have a family member? Yes, his mother had diabetes. So it tells you who the family members are that you should put yes or no for. When you go onto the website. What's his weight? He weighs 75 kilograms. And then it asks him what his height is. His height is 167 centimeters, so 5'6" in the old measurements. And so his body mass index is just under 27. So he's overweight. So, and I'll go into that a bit more, as I said, later. Does he exercise? And it defines exercise as at least 4 times a week, half an hour, 4 times a week. And no, he doesn't manage to get that much exercise. And does he smoke? No, he's never smoked. So it takes him through those 8 questions. And then it starts to ask you the questions on diet, another 5 questions. So what sort of diet do you have? Does he eat fruit every day? Well, yes, he does. Does he eat whole grains every day? And by that, it's things like brown rice and wholemeal bread, etc. And the answer is no in his case. Does he drink sugary drinks every day? And he says yes. And by every day, it's talking about at least 4 times a week in each of these. Yes, he likes his sugar in his tea and his coffee, and he has juices. Yes, he likes his sugary drinks. Does he eat red meat every day? Well, red meat is defined as beef, lamb, and pork. And no, he tends to eat chicken more of the time, or maybe other things like tofu and fish. So no, he doesn't eat red meat 4 times a week. And does he eat nuts every day 4 times a week? And the answer is no, nuts and grains and things like that. So that's the end of the questionnaire that you would be given if you went onto their website, and I'd advise you to consider doing that. And then it would take you onto the next page, which gives you your scoring. So this is what it comes up with. How did I determine my risk of diabetes? And he would score as high risk. So it's based on, it then tells you why he scores high risk. He's getting older, he's overweight, he's got high blood pressure, he has a family history in his mother of diabetes, and it takes you through each of the things. He's inactive, and his diet is poor, but he doesn't smoke. And if you're on the website, it'll then take you on to look at how you might reduce that risk further, which I'm going to do in this talk. So that's just taking you through how you might be able to determine whether you're low, high, or medium risk. Now, the risk, as I said before, is not certainty. So being at high risk doesn't say you've got diabetes, neither does it say you're going to definitely get diabetes. But if you are at high risk, you probably need to be talking to your doctor to determine whether you might already have diabetes, in which case the only way of finding that out is to do a blood test, or if you're at high risk, what you can do about it, and some of the things I'm going to talk to you here about. But if you are at high risk, it's in that. And the other group of people is, as you get older, you should definitely be considering talking to your doctor about getting tested for diabetes. And usually what is recommended is if you're at high risk, or as you're getting older, beyond the age of about 40, 45, you maybe have a test done every few years. 3 to 5 years is what is generally recommended. So the big question, is diabetes preventable? Well, the simple answer is yes, thankfully. It doesn't mean that you can definitely prevent it in every case, but it can be there. So the research around this, and it's the only research paper I'm going to show you. I've shown you this paper, which is published in what's called the Cochrane Library. Cochrane Library are the gold standard of reviews, and this paper looked at diet and physical activity for the prevention of type 2 diabetes, and it took 12 trials that were all really high quality from around the world, from the United States, from Finland, from China, from many other countries, and put them all together to determine whether it gives a clear answer on whether diabetes is preventable. And their conclusion is here: the development of type 2 diabetes is reduced or delayed by diet plus physical activity compared with normal behavior. So therefore, good news. The things you can change make a difference. You can reduce or delay the chance of getting diabetes if you carry out the sort of measures that they're talking about. So I'm going to take you through those measures that are actually mentioned in this review and obviously in the original research trials that were actually done. So the 3 major things that the paper talks about are these. What can I do to prevent or delay diabetes? Number 1, maintain a healthy weight. And I'll go into this a bit more, but obesity or being overweight is associated with diabetes, but it's also associated with many, many other conditions: heart disease, depression, stroke, including things like some cancers and the like. So maintaining a healthy weight is a good idea. And it's not so hard as it suggests, and I'll explain why in a minute in terms of the trials that have been done. Gaining regular physical activity, keeping physically active decreases your risk of diabetes and most of the other diseases that actually are associated with being overweight and obese. And then eating healthy foods. Very, very simple, these 3 things. Whole grains, green leafy vegetables, and fruits all decrease your risk of diabetes. So those are the 3 things that we know will actually prevent or delay diabetes. So what do I mean by maintaining a healthy weight? I said it wasn't quite as severe as I said. So all of the trials that were done aimed at reduction in weight, losing weight of about 5 to 7% of your weight in these trials. So if you take this gentleman who we looked at before, who's high risk of diabetes, and he weighed 75 kilograms, a 5% reduction in weight means him losing about 4 kilograms. Not an impossible feat. It doesn't take him down into the ideal weight range in terms of body mass index, but it leads to a reduction in the risk of diabetes that is quite considerable. And when you actually look at many of these trials that were done, a lot of them didn't even achieve what the target was, the 5 to 7% reduction, but still led to a reduction in progression to diabetes, or prevented people getting diabetes, mainly because by trying to lose weight, the people stopped themselves gaining more weight. And so even if you're struggling to lose weight, the important thing is not to be putting on more weight. So it is quite important in terms of that. So I've mentioned body mass index a few times already. So healthy weight is normally defined by this thing called body mass index, which is your weight in kilogram divided by your height squared, which sounds a bit complicated in meters. But the easiest thing to do is to just Google body mass index calculator, and you put your two figures in, your height and your weight, and it will work it out for you. So a healthy Asian body mass index, or ideal body mass index for the Asian population, is between 18 to 23. So when you look yours up later, if it's not within that, you should be aiming for some weight reduction. Aim for about 5 to 7% of your weight to go down. There's a very simple calculation or equation that has been around for as long as anybody could ever remember, which is that the number of calories you take in each day has to be balanced off by the number of calories you burn off in terms of energy. And if it doesn't, if you take in more calories than you burn off, you are going to gain weight. It's just simple maths. So the easiest way to lose weight, which is just to reduce the size of the amount that you actually eat. So reduce the quantity of food. Now, there are numerous diets around, but in my experience, you have to find a diet that is going to be something that you stick to for a long period of time. So the best way to do it is just to take the same food or a similar food, and I'll look at the similar foods in a minute in terms of quality, and just reduce down the quantity. So if it's rice and you normally ladle 3, 4, 5 spoonfuls of rice onto your plate, instead measure your rice into a cup and take a cup fully every time, so that you don't exceed the amount that you would do if you just ladle lots on. And you can do the same with lots of other things, foodstuffs. If you're like me, when you were brought up, I was told I always had to clean my plate, and my parents insisted on it. But that's not good in terms of healthcare and so on. So if you have eaten sufficient, stop and either put it in the fridge and use it another day, or actually it's not great, but throw it away, because it is far better doing that than actually gaining the weight. So reduce the quantity that you eat. So the second thing that we talked about was the quality of the foods that we eat. And that's not in terms of where you buy them from or anything like that. It's just the types of food. So I'm going to go through some of the common foods or food groups that you have. And on the left-hand side here, point out the things that you need to cut down on, and then point out on the right-hand side what you need to be substituting them with. So I'm very sorry to start with this one, but white rice is lethal for diabetes and many other conditions. And that white rice is a carbohydrate, a refined carbohydrate. It's had the best part of the rice taken off it. And basically the other carbohydrates are things like noodles, pasta, or refined pasta, and potatoes and things like that. So instead of having white rice, and some people might groan at this, brown rice is healthier. Several research trials have shown that that brown rice actually reduces the chance of developing diabetes considerably. Or other whole grains that you need, wholemeal bread, other whole grains that are useful. So please try and cut down on white rice. Substitute brown rice as much as you can. In my house, there is no white rice, there is only brown rice. And once you've got used to it, it's far tastier. I know not everybody agrees with that. So palm and coconut oil, not good for you. Very high calorific sort of values. Substitute olive oil or canola oil or other vegetable oils for those because they are far healthier, sesame oil, etc. Red meat. By red meat, what I mean is beef, lamb and pork. Cut down on them. Processed meat, tin meats, bacon, sausages, those sorts of things. Try and cut down on them. They have very high fat content, both red meat and processed meats. And substitute instead chicken, fish, tofu, and beans, and other types of protein, such as those. So we're not talking about radical changes so that you don't have any of these. We're talking about substituting some of it for more healthy alternatives. Sugary drinks and juice. I would say, in this case, it's worthwhile trying to get rid of those out of your diet. And instead go for water, unsweetened tea or coffee, or if you cannot do without at all the sort of sweetness of the taste, substitute sweetness for sugar, and take that instead. Take those instead. Processed snack foods, the sort of things we all maybe love to have a snack on, candies and cookies and lots of other snack foods that are there. If possible, substitute some fruit, cut up fruit, vegetables, nuts, and so on, and snack on them instead, and get used to those. So that's a sort of how you get into a healthier diet. And we're not talking about never having any of these. We're talking about reducing them down and trying to get more of these. And this is, if you go onto the website, the Asian Risk Calculator, it will take you to this site towards the end. And basically it's suggesting that, you know, just under half of your diet should be fruit and veg, green vegetables particularly, and any types of fruit which are good for you, and substituting the oils, like I said, not using things like butter and coconut oil, but using olive oil and sesame oil and vegetable oils. And then on the other side, using whole grains instead of the refined grains that we use, like the white rice and the white pasta and white noodles and so on, and substituting healthy proteins, fish, chicken, tofu, beans and the like for the red meats to an extent, and getting rid of your sugary drinks and taking healthier alternatives in terms of that. So that gives you an idea of what a healthy diet looks like. So the final thing is, what do I mean by regular physical activity? Well, generally 30 minutes of brisk walking every day is ideal. If you can't do that, try and aim for 4 or 5 times a week at least. Try and fit exercise in that you can, a bit like changing your diet, you need an exercise that you can sustain. So if you take the car to work and it's not too far and you can walk or bike each day, do that instead. Take the stairs where you are. I have a 4 flights rule in my life, which is that if I'm going up less than 4 flights, I walk. If it's more than that, if it's 20 flights, I take the elevator. So, you know, you can choose to do that. Now, the more intensive forms of exercise are better, and you might need a bit less of those. So that includes going to the gym workouts, yoga, tai chi, jogging, resistance training, and so on. That give you a much more intense workout. So as I say there, you need to find a type of exercise you enjoy doing. And the other way to avoid inactivity is to make sure that you don't watch too much TV, don't spend too much time on the same social medias and things like that, and then you get up and actually wander around. Even if you're at work, it's worthwhile getting up and going, getting some water and various things like that, so that your body is maintaining its activity during the day. So just to summarize, where are we at? Well, diabetes is a serious condition, and it should not be underrated, and it quite often is. It's increasing in its prevalence in society. More and more people are getting it, largely because we're living lives that are less and less healthy. It is preventable. We're all at risk to an extent. Some of us are at much higher risk than others. And the things you can do to actually reduce that risk are to maintain a healthy weight, to eat healthy foods, and to get regular physical activity. If you do those things and work at them, you will reduce your risk of getting diabetes. It won't eliminate that risk, but it will reduce it down and reduce the chance of you going on to develop diabetes. So I hope that's been helpful to you, and I'm willing to answer any other questions. That's the website for the diabetes risk calculator again, and thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Prof. I was all ears because I think it's a very important time that we learn about this disease, and knowing that by 2025 there's going to be more than 7 million Malaysian adults likely to get diabetes. So I think, like the saying goes, Prof, prevention is always better than cure. So I think we really appreciate you taking time to sharing your expertise with the audience today. So we have some very important questions that I would like to highlight, so Prof can answer these questions. For the attendees, you can still type in your questions at the question pane, so I can highlight it to Prof. The first one, Prof, very interesting one. Okay, like natural sugar, you said, fruit is very, very good for you, and like honey, fruit. Do you have to worry about the quantity that you take, Prof?
Yeah, just to clarify, honey is not it's a pure sugar. So it's got the same risk as just adding sugar anyway. So honey is not sort of in the same vein as fruit. So no, I mean, fruit and vegetables you can eat in quite large quantities. There are some fruits that have a lot higher sugar content than others, so they're probably best keeping down. I've sort of shared before, I worked in the Middle East for a while, and same in Malaysia. People we used to eat loads and loads of dates during Ramadan and think that because they were fruit, they were fine. But in fact, they're absolutely packed with sugar. And so you have to be very careful at the amounts of dates you eat. And there are other fruits that are very high in sugar. So you need to be careful of those. But the fruits that people eat commonly, your sort of things like, mango and apples, oranges, those sort of things, you can eat them very liberally. And the vegetable side of things, absolutely. There's no limit to really the amount they can eat. I mean, there is reason, but there isn't limit. You're muted.
Sorry. Okay, there's also another question. How much nuts do we need to consume a day? Which ones would you recommend? From Johnson. Okay,
there's no, again, nuts are healthy because they give you quite a lot of protein, and the oils that come from nuts are not particularly damaging like some of the other oils like the coconut oil and the palm oil and so on. So there's no quantity that you must eat a day. That's probably true of most things. I mean, I'm not a great believer in dictating diets to people. I'm a great believer in sensible eating. So I know that all of my patients with diabetes would cheat at times and eat loads of stuff that they shouldn't. But as long as they are sensible most of the time, and then, there's no problem. Everybody has cheats and likes to do things, then eat very, your nice big piece of chocolate cake or whatever it is that is your fancy. So nuts are very healthy, and there's probably not that limit. Almonds, cashews, peanuts, they're all fine. So there's no, again, the sort of nuts is not so important as actually the nuts. And so if obviously some people use them in cooking as well, and they're a good substitute for some of the red meats if you're cooking with them.
So balance is key, right?
Balance is key. It's not going, just to add to that, you're not going to stick to something unless you can live with it. So, you know, it's a case of being balanced and not going to extremes. And so sometimes people will try diets that they'll never stick to forever. And there's just no point in starting down that route, because as soon as you stop that diet, or you give up, which invariably happens, you'll end up putting the weight back on again. So you're better off finding a nice diet that suits you, that has some substitutions, that gets healthier foods, but doesn't, but still allows you to enjoy your life and your eating.
Okay, interesting. Okay, there's another very interesting question here, which I'm also curious about. So we hear a lot about, like, you know, Diet Coke, Zero Coke, and there are many of such products, right? Like that, those are alternatives to unhealthy carbonated drinks or equivalent. So what is your view about these products, food?
Well, my view is that the ideal is to get rid of carbonated drinks out of your diet, but because of the sense of balance, I know not everybody can. So without a doubt, they are better than the normal ones. So your Zero Coke, your Diet Coke, and so on is better than having normal Coca-Cola. So you're better off sort of going for those, yes, without a doubt. I mean, what they have is they have sweeteners in rather than sugar, and so they still give you some of the sweet flavor. I gather, because I don't drink much carbonated drinks, they do. I gather they do taste different, but they're not as dangerous as your full sugar ones.
Okay, interesting. Actually, I never take carbonated drinks, but you know, stopping it all over again. Like, I don't want to take even the sugar-free drinks anymore after listening to your talk, Prof. Okay, about diets, right? So we have various, like we have many variety of diets online. You can search for information. There's keto, there's Atkins, the vegetarianism, raw food diet. What do you think is the best diet for someone who would like to prevent diabetes?
Okay, going back to what I said before, the best diet is the diet that you can live with for the rest of your life, because there's no point starting a diet and then finishing it after 3 months, which loads of people do. And they come in, they say, well, I dieted, I lost 2 kilograms, 3 kilograms, and then it all went back on as soon as I finished the diet. I can tell you from the research, there's been reviews of diets comparing all the different diets, and there's very little difference between them in the long term. In the short term, sometimes one diet is superior to another in helping you to lose a lot of weight quickly. But in the long term, those diets often don't persist with the weight loss above others. So it's going back to this thing that I think we've already said several times. Choose a diet that you're going to be able to live with over a long period of time. Choose a diet that your family can live with. If your spouse refuses to cooperate with your diet, you're not going to stick to it very long. Choose a diet that's not expensive. If it involves buying a lot of special foods and that are really expensive, again, you're not going to be able to manage that, because it's going to add to your budget to the extent that eventually you're going to have to make a decision, do I choose my diet over my budget? And you might well decide then that you're going to give that up. So all in all, it is down to being sensible, cutting down on the quantity of food and substituting healthier foods for what you did before, and combining that with physical activity. Because actually it's not diet alone and it's not physical activity alone. Interestingly, that review I showed you, they did look at whether either of them on its own was good enough, and it's not. You have to try and do both. You have to aim for a good diet and aim to get physical activity as well. So it's back to that equation of calories in has to equal calories out. So just cutting your calories down does not help if they're still exceeding the amount of exercise you take. So when it comes to a diet, don't go for fad diets is what I would recommend. Don't go for diets that are expensive, and don't go for diets that everybody else in your household is not going to join you with, because you won't be able to keep it going in the long term. Try and find something that you'll think, well, if I substitute a few of these things, if I get used to brown rice, if I get used to not having pork every day of the week, but substituting chicken or fish or tofu for a few of the days a week, etc. Those sorts of things will eventually, you can sustain those over a very long period of time, and they're going to lead to weight gain that is weight loss that is sustained.
Very interesting, Prof. And I think you've also answered one of the other question about fitness. Like somebody asked, you know, how strenuous should it be? Like, should I do it twice? I mean, like, you know, alternate days and so on. But I think you've already answered that question. And what works for you?
I'll just add to that, though, that the general guidance is to aim for at least 150 minutes a week. So that's 30 minutes 5 times a week or something like that. So, you know, we're again, I'm a realist. I mean, you know, we change our behavior, we adopt things, and then we fall back a bit and we work at it again. But if you aim to do something every day, you get into the habit. Forming habits are very good things. So people stick with habits, and it's one of the best things with behavioral change is to try and get into a habit. So if you get into the habit of going for a walk every evening, you know, rather than watching television straight after dinner or something like that, go for a walk every day. And once you're into the habit of doing that, you tend to stick with it. And it's the same thing with diet. It's the same thing with all of these things. So try and get into a habit of doing the same thing every day, and then it's easier to stick with it.
Thank you, Prof. Just took notes there. 150 minutes a week, right? Yeah. Great. Okay. This is a very interesting question, and I think many people can relate to this. Can physical stress or mental stress affect your blood sugar? What is your thought on this?
Yes, it can, but less so than your diet and your activity. So yes, because some of the hormones related to your blood sugar rising are some of the stress hormones. And so things like cortisol and so on can all cause your blood sugar to rise. So yes, if you get stressed and so on, it can cause your blood sugar to rise and so on. So, but as I say, the interesting thing is, of course, one of the ways of de-stressing is to get some physical activity, and so go for a walk. So you know, it will help both your blood sugar to come down and your stress levels to come down as well. So you know, yes is the answer to the question, but there are the ways that you deal with stress are probably not that dissimilar to the ways that you might help prevent diabetes as well.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you, Prof. There's one more question that's, okay, why do some people opt for Ayurvedic medicine to treat diabetes rather than conventional measures, saying that it works well? What are your thoughts on this?
I have no problems with Ayurvedic medicine compared with sort of what is conventional medicine. As long as you don't exclude one over the other. If the Ayurvedic medicine keeps your blood sugar perfectly controlled and you know that that's the case, fine. But if it isn't, you actually have to look at your blood sugar rather than just, it's not your allegiance to a type of medicine, in other words, it's your health that is important and getting your blood sugar well controlled. So interestingly, one of the research studies I did when I was in Bahrain was a study of the use of all complementary medicines in people with diabetes. So I know that from there and all of the other studies that have been published around the world on that about 60–70% of people with diabetes use alternative medicines in various different ways. So yeah, it's fine as long as it doesn't become a faith system. I have come across people who believe so strongly that it's right that they've nearly killed themselves and injured themselves seriously, allowing their blood sugar to become very high because they don't want to take conventional medicine, even though the complementary medicine has not worked. So by all means, you know, if it doesn't harm you, you know, and it may be doing you good, fine. So it's a personal choice. But as I say, the important thing is to make sure you get your blood sugar controlled, not the means by which you do it. So you can get your blood sugar controlled in some people, not in everybody with diabetes, just by controlling your diet and your activity level. So with no medicine whatsoever. So, there's lots of different ways of looking at it, but that doesn't work for everybody, the diet and activity, although it's important.
Very, very useful advice, Prof. What works for you is more important than that, right? Okay, I like this one. What is the best alternative to replace normal sugar, Prof?
Nothing.
I guess that's much.
That's next. You don't have to get rid of sugar out of your diet. I think the important thing to realize is sugar is not the enemy. Everything you eat gets broken down by your body, and nearly everything you eat gets broken down by your body into sugars. So whatever you eat is going to be there. So it's there. So what you want to do is to be cutting down on the refined sugars, and that's why the sugary drinks are like that. But I actually bake, and I bake cakes. But largely, if I'm following a recipe, I'll have the amount of sugar in a cake, and it tastes fine to me because most cakes are too sweet. And it's things like that. So you can cut down on quantities. I'm not saying get rid of sugar, because refined sugar even is, and honey and all that sort of stuff, which is all the same actually. I'm not saying get rid of them. I enjoy honey, etc. But it's the quantity that you take. So if you're drinking sugary drinks every day, it's important to cut that down. So substitutions, if you like things really, really sweet, and you can't bear cutting down sugar because you like it so sweet, the alternative is to use sweetener, the best alternative apart from cutting out sugar, because there's a lot of talk always about natural sugars like honey and other alternatives like that, brown sugar and so on. There's no difference between brown sugar and honey and refined sugar in terms of the effect it has on your blood sugar. It's exactly the same. So because your body processes it and turns it into sugar, it's exactly the same. So if you want to cut down on the amount of sugar you're taking in terms of that, you basically have to go for some form of sweetener. But ideally, what you want to do is reduce down the sweetness of your foods. Taste is a bit like habit forming as well. Some of our taste is predetermined by what our mother has even eaten in the womb. But other parts of our taste is acquired during our life, and even particularly in childhood. So if you get rid of, for instance, when I started drinking tea and coffee when I was a teenager, I added sugar to it. And then I think I was in my early 20s, I decided to stop using sugar. I got rid of it. The coffee and tea tasted awful to begin with. But now if you put sugar in my tea or coffee, it tastes disgusting. So your taste changes depending on what you actually take in. So if you slowly reduce down the amount of sugar you're adding to your diet, your desire to have sugary taste will drop.
That's very interesting. I was just going to ask you about the brown sugar thing, because I'm sure many people have this misconception that brown sugar is actually better than white sugar. And, that you have answered that, and that's very useful. So does it make any difference?
Actually, brown bread is no different to white bread. It's wholemeal bread that's different. Brown bread is just the same as white bread in terms of being processed. It's a different color. And it's the same with brown sugar and white sugar. There's no difference in terms of its effect on your blood sugar levels and so on, and your chance of getting diabetes.
We know now. Right. One last question for Prof. David today before we end the session. This is also a very interesting one. I'm sure many would want to know. Does getting enough sleep lowers your blood sugar? I've read that not enough sleep actually messes up your insulin level. How much is enough sleep for a minimum?
I'm glad somebody asked that question, because this is really important, actually. Sleep, increasingly, I mean, the research has been around for years, but it's starting to become a lot more prominent in people's thinking. And not enough sleep or too much sleep both increase your risk of diabetes. And I didn't raise it on the items, but it is there. So yes, sleep is really important for a lot of diseases, heart disease, various things like that as well. So what is normally recommended is somewhere around about 7 to 9 hours a night. So people say, oh, I can manage on 4 hours. Well, they may well do, but that doesn't mean it's good for you. If you sleep 10, 11 hours, it's also not good for you. It's too much. So the range is 7 to 9 hours. It's actually a bit even more complicated than that, because it's actually the proportion of different types of sleep you get as well. So there's what's called deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep and light sleep. And then sometimes you have mini awakes during the night, which some of you remember and some of you don't, but you do have them. And so it's the balance of some of those things as well. So like deep sleep, if you get more of that, it actually helps to repair your body in various different ways. And so we recommend that of your sleep, about 10% of it ideally is deep sleep. But that's getting into a bit of technicalities, but you can get measures done of that. But the general aim is to get 7 to 9 hours. And to get it at the same time. That's the other thing. And people don't realize this. Most of us have a body clock. So if you're sort of a late sleeper and you go to bed at 11:30 every night, try and go to bed at 11:30 every night and keep to that as a routine, and then get up at 7 o'clock every morning. And if you can keep to that routine, it's also good for your sleep. But yes, the quality and the quantity of your sleep, increasingly we know that it has an impact on your health, and it also has an impact on your risk of developing diabetes. So thank you for whoever raised that question. It's a very important question.
Thank you very much, Prof. David. Yeah, I think it's all about forming that habit, right? I noticed that in all your answers, you mentioned one thing that was really, really important, when it comes to dieting, when it comes to, taking care of your health, even exercising, it's all about forming that habit, which, you will get used to into the routine after some time of doing those. So I think that is the takeaway for today's session. And I would really like to thank you, Prof, for, shedding light on diabetes. And, I believe that many people would have gotten a lot of answers today to their questions. So,
thank you, Raji, and I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for listening. I've enjoyed this session, and I hope you've gained from it.
Thank you very much, Prof. If you have any other questions, audience, please feel free to email us at enquiry@rcsiucd.edu.my. Professor Whitford will be happy to take your questions. Once you leave the session, you will receive a short survey on today's event, and we would appreciate it if you could complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within the next 24 hours with a link to view a recording of today's event. Some of you have asked for the link to test your diabetes risk, and Prof. Whitford had actually shared that link in his presentation. You can actually view it when you view the recording later. On behalf of RCSI and UCD Malaysia campus and our speaker, we would like to thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next keynote session in August 2021. Thank you and stay safe. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.